The wind howled through the Alaskan mountains like a wounded animal, carrying with it the weight of 1,000 storms. Snow fell in endless sheets, swallowing every trace of life beneath a white oblivion. Through that blizzard, Sergeant Ethan Cole trudged forward, his breath crystallizing in the freezing air, every exhale a small cloud of persistence. Beside him, his loyal K-9 partner Rex, a sable German shepherd trained for combat and rescue, moved with instinctive precision. Ears twitching, nose low to the ground, tail stiff with alertness. The pair had been on reconnaissance for nearly 3 hours after a faint distress signal had been intercepted from a remote mountain ridge near the border. Ethan knew the signal could be a trap, yet something in the urgency of that static-filled transmission stirred his gut. He trusted his instincts. More than that, he trusted Rex. The snow grew deeper, and visibility shrank to almost nothing. Ethan's gloved hand brushed the rifle slung across his chest as he scanned the desolate expanse. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his voice muffled by the wind. Rex gave a low whine, then froze, head turning sharply to the right. His nose flared. Ethan stopped breathing for a moment, watching as the dog began to paw at the snow near a cluster of jagged rocks. The bark that came next was sharp, frantic, desperate. Ethan dropped to his knees beside him, digging through the packed snow with his hands. His fingers hit something solid, a sleeve, a shoulder, skin cold as ice. "Jesus," he whispered, brushing away frost to reveal the pale, lifeless face of a man in a tattered naval uniform. But then faintly the man stirred. Ethan's heart kicked in his chest. "He's alive! Rex! Good boy!" He kept digging and soon unearthed a second man, tied up with frozen ropes, his lips blue and trembling. Both wore U.S. Navy tags, Lieutenant Mark Harris and Corporal Ryan Dean. Their bodies were weak, on the edge of death. Ethan moved fast, wrapping them in his thermal blanket, lighting a flare to melt snow for water. "Stay with me," he said over and over, the words half command, half plea. Rex lay beside the men, licking their faces as if to will life back into them. Slowly, color began to return to their skin. After stabilizing them, Ethan radioed into base, but the storm had worsened, cutting all signals. Static filled his headset. "Damn it," he muttered. They were alone out there, 40 miles from the nearest outpost, with no communication and 2 injured soldiers. He knew staying put would mean death, so he built a makeshift sled using parts of his gear and began hauling them downhill, Rex guiding ahead through the blizzard like a spirit made of will and fur. Hours passed, time losing all shape. At moments, Ethan's mind flickered with flashes of warmth, his daughter's laughter, sunlight over Denver, the simple sound of waves. But each time, the cold yanked him back. The mountain did not forgive. Weakness. Near dusk, they reached an abandoned supply cabin buried half in snow. Ethan forced the frozen door open and dragged the men inside. The smell of damp wood and rusted metal hit his nostrils, but it was shelter. He started a fire with the last of his rations, tore open medical kits and checked for vitals. Harris's pulse was faint, but steady. Dean coughed, a sign of life. "You're safe now," Ethan said softly. Rex curled up beside them, eyes half closed yet alert, listening to every creak outside. The storm roared beyond the cabin walls, relentless, but inside for the first time there was a flicker of warmth. Hours later, Harris regained consciousness. His lips trembled as he tried to speak, but only fragments escaped. Something about Japanese, plans, ambush. Ethan leaned closer. "What plans?" Harris's eyes widened in fear. "They know. The Navy doesn't. They're coming." Then he passed out again. Ethan's pulse quickened. He looked toward Rex, who met his gaze with an understanding only they shared. This was no ordinary rescue. The 2 soldiers weren't just victims of the cold. They were carrying a secret heavy enough to change the course of war. Outside, the wind screamed like a warning from the heavens, and Ethan knew one thing for sure. Their frozen trail had just become a battlefield. The fire in the old cabin had long since burned down to glowing embers, casting a faint orange light across the frost-bitten walls. Outside, the storm had calmed into a heavy silence, the kind that only the dead of night in Alaska could hold. Ethan sat by the doorway, his rifle resting across his knees, his eyes locked on the darkness beyond the frosted window. Rex lay beside him, his breathing steady, though his ears twitched at every whisper of wind. The two rescued men, Harris and Dean, slept under thick blankets near the fire. Their faces, once pale as death, now carried a faint flush of returning life. But the words Harris had spoken before fainting haunted Ethan like a ghost. "They're coming." What did he mean? Who was coming? Dawn crept slowly over the frozen horizon, turning the snow into an ocean of silver light. When Harris finally stirred awake, his voice was barely a whisper. "You shouldn't have found us," he said weakly. "They'll come for it." Ethan leaned forward. "For what?" Harris looked toward his backpack, its fabric stiff from ice, then back at Ethan, with eyes full of something between fear and duty. "Inside," he rasped. Ethan opened the pack and found a small metal case, no bigger than a lunchbox, sealed with a double lock and marked with the insignia of the U.S. Navy's Pacific Command. "We were transporting this to Washington," Harris continued, his breath trembling. "Encrypted intelligence, Japanese naval transmission logs, plans for a massive strike." Ethan's stomach tightened. "You're saying Japan's preparing an attack?" Harris nodded slowly. Pearl Harbor wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The room fell into silence except for the crackle of the fire. Ethan stared at the metal case, feeling its weight far beyond its size. "We need to get this to command," he said. "Where's your extraction point?" Harris shook his head. "Compromised. Our plane went down because someone knew our route. There's a leak inside the chain." He coughed, clutching his side. Ethan poured him water and pressed gently. "Someone in our ranks?" Harris didn't answer. His silence was enough. Ethan looked to Rex, who stood now, tail rigid, eyes fixed on the cabin door. "We move now," Ethan decided. "Storm's easing, and we can't risk another night here." Within an hour they had packed up, wrapped the injured men in layers, and left the cabin behind. The landscape stretched endless, a white void beneath a sky bruised with gray. Rex led the way, his nose cutting through the frozen air like a compass guided by instinct. Every step was a battle. The snow dragged at their legs, the cold gnawed at their bones. Yet beneath the exhaustion there was purpose, a flicker of something greater. Around midday they reached a narrow valley where an old logging road cut through the mountains. Tire tracks marked the snow. Fresh ones. Ethan's gut twisted. "We're not alone," he muttered. He signaled Rex to stay low, scanning the tree line. A faint metallic glint flickered from the ridge. A sniper's scope. The crack of a rifle split the air. The bullet struck a tree inches from Harris's head. "Down!" Ethan shouted, throwing himself into the snow. Dean, barely able to move, dragged Harris behind a fallen log while Ethan returned fire. The echo of gunfire rolled through the valley, swallowed by the cold. Rex bolted toward the ridge, darting through drifts, his dark shape barely visible. A scream came from above, the sniper's fall. The silence that followed was sharp and heavy. When Ethan reached the ridge, he found the body of a man dressed not in Japanese uniform but in an American parka, a U.S. intelligence badge on his chest. The shock hit him like ice water. "A leak," he whispered. They were right. He searched the man's pockets and found a coded note written in Japanese, along with a torn photograph of a man shaking hands with a smiling official, Mayor Martin Hale of Coldhaven. Ethan felt the chill deepen in his veins. A trusted U.S. town leader, a spy. He realized then that this mission was far bigger than a rescue. Harris and Dean hadn't just been running from the cold, they'd been hunted. As the sun sank behind the peaks, Ethan buried the sniper's body under snow, knowing others would come. They set up camp by the frozen stream, exhaustion thick in the air. Harris clutched the metal case close to his chest, whispering as if to himself, "We have less than 48 hours." Ethan nodded grimly, staring out into the blinding white, the horizon whispering of danger yet to come. Beside him, Rex lifted his head, eyes glowing in the firelight, ready for what awaited beyond the ice. The town of Coldhaven emerged from the fog like a ghost frozen in time. Small, wooden houses lined the streets, their roofs heavy with snow, smoke curling from chimneys that gave the illusion of warmth. Ethan Cole pulled the hood of his parka tighter as he guided the sled carrying Harris and Dean through the deserted main road. Rex trotted ahead, his paws silent on the icy ground, every muscle tense. They had been traveling for hours since leaving the valley where they found the spy's body. The discovery of Mayor Martin Hale's photograph still echoed in Ethan's mind like a warning. Now, as they entered the town limits, he could feel eyes watching from behind half-drawn curtains. Coldhaven was supposed to be friendly territory, a supply outpost for military patrols, but something about the silence felt wrong. They stopped in front of the old city hall, its flag stiff from frost, the sign faded but still legible. Ethan helped Harris down from the sled, supporting his weakened frame. "You sure about this?" Harris asked, his voice strained. Ethan nodded. "We need transport and a radio. If anyone can get us to base, it's the mayor." Harris hesitated, his gaze flicking toward Rex, who let out a low growl. Inside, the hall was warm but eerily quiet. A single light flickered above the desk where Mayor Martin Hale stood, smiling with practiced ease. He was tall, neatly dressed despite the cold, his manner too calm for a man in wartime. "Sergeant Cole," he greeted, extending his hand, "we heard about your rescue. You've done this country proud." Ethan shook his hand, the grip too smooth, too rehearsed. "We need a vehicle and radio access," he said bluntly. Hale nodded. "Of course. My men will prepare it." His eyes briefly settled on the metal case Harris carried, a flicker of recognition passing before he masked it with a polite smile. "You must be exhausted. There's food and warmth here. Rest a while." Something inside Ethan's chest tightened. "We'll rest after we contact command," he replied. Hale's smile didn't falter, but the air in the room grew heavier. Rex's ears perked, tail stiff, a low rumble rising from his throat. The sound came seconds before Ethan noticed the shadow moving behind the curtains. He drew his gun, spinning toward the doorway as the first shot shattered the lamp. Glass exploded. Harris dove to the floor. "Ambush!" Ethan shouted. Rex lunged at a figure emerging from the hallway, knocking the gun from his hand. Chaos erupted. The sound of boots, the crack of gunfire, and Hale's voice shouting orders in Japanese. Ethan's heart sank. The mayor wasn't just a collaborator. He was leading the enemy. He fired back, covering Harris and Dean as they crawled toward the exit. Rex fought ferociously, biting and dragging down an attacker twice his size. "Go, Rex!" Ethan yelled, throwing open the back door. They burst into the alley, the cold biting harder than ever. Snow swirled through the narrow passage as bullets tore splinters from the walls. They ran toward the edge of town, where the frozen river cut through the forest. Ethan turned, firing a final shot that shattered a lantern and plunged the street into darkness. They made it to an abandoned truck near the sawmill. Ethan forced the engine to life with trembling hands while Harris clutched the case tight against his chest. Dean, pale but determined, loaded his last rifle round. "They knew we were coming," he gasped. Ethan nodded grimly. "Hale must have intercepted the valley transmission. He's feeding everything to the Japanese." As the truck lurched forward, Rex barked sharply, his head snapping toward the rear window. Figures emerged behind them. Hale's men on snowmobiles, headlights cutting through the storm like knives. The chase tore across the frozen plains, the engines screaming against the cold. Ethan swerved around fallen trees, the truck bouncing violently. Bullets ricocheted off the metal sides. One grazed his shoulder, searing pain down his arm. "We can't outrun them!" Dean shouted. Ethan's jaw tightened. "We don't have to. We just need to reach the old mining tunnel." The map in his memory guided him through the darkness, every turn carved by instinct and desperation. At last the truck skidded into a narrow gorge, tires grinding against ice. "This is it!" he shouted. They abandoned the vehicle and rushed inside the tunnel as the snowmobile screeched to a halt outside. Echoes of shouts followed them into the dark. Ethan lit a flare, its orange light painting the walls with ghostly reflections. "We hold them here," he said. Rex stood beside him, chest heaving, eyes glowing like twin embers in the dark. Harris crouched behind a rock, clutching the metal case as if it were his last lifeline. Outside, Hale's voice carried through the wind, cold and venomous. "You can't run, Sergeant. That secret dies here." Ethan raised his rifle, determination burning through the exhaustion. "Then we die keeping it," he whispered. The tunnel fell silent except for the slow, steady growl of a loyal dog preparing to defend his master. The tunnel was a grave of echoes and shadows. Every drip of melting ice felt like a countdown. Ethan Cole crouched low behind the jagged rocks, his breath fogging the air, the flare burning dim beside him. Harris sat near the back, clutching the metal case against his chest as if it were the last heartbeat of the free world. Dean lay beside him, pale but conscious, his rifle trembling in his hands. Outside, Hale's men were gathering, their voices distorted by the wind. "There's no way out," Dean whispered. Ethan's eyes scanned the narrow path that led deeper into the mountain. "There's always a way," he said quietly, though his tone betrayed the weight of doubt. Rex stood at the entrance, muscles coiled, ears pinned back, growling low as the first footsteps echoed through the tunnel. Then came the voice, smooth, cold, and mocking. "Sergeant Cole," called Hale, his words carried on the wind. "You can't win. Hand over the case, and maybe I'll let you live long enough to see your country burn." Ethan rose slowly, rifle aimed toward the light. "You'll never touch it," he said. A shot cracked, ricocheting off the stone wall, and the battle began. Bullets flashed like lightning in the dark. Ethan fired back, taking down two silhouettes before ducking behind cover. Dean screamed as a round hit his shoulder. Harris crawled to him, pressing a hand over the wound. "Stay with me," he shouted. But there was no time. The air filled with smoke and gunfire. Rex leapt into the chaos, snarling, tearing into an attacker who broke through the barricade. His growl was primal, a sound of loyalty forged in blood. Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears as he realized the inevitable. They were outnumbered, outgunned, trapped. He grabbed the detonator clip to his vest, the last failsafe he carried. "Harris," he called over the gunfire, "take the case and go deeper into the mine. There's a vent shaft. Rex will lead you." Harris shook his head fiercely. "You're not staying behind." Ethan's eyes softened for the first time in days. "This is what we do, Lieutenant. We hold the line." He turned to Rex and whispered, "Protect him." Rex hesitated, eyes wide, understanding more than any animal should. Then, as Harris and Dean disappeared into the darkness, Rex looked back one last time. Ethan gave a nod. The dog turned and followed. The next wave came hard. Hale himself entered, gun drawn, a sneer on his face. "You could have been a hero, Cole," he hissed. "I am," Ethan replied, pressing the detonator. The explosion swallowed his words, a blinding roar of fire and snow. The tunnel collapsed, sealing the mountain in a storm of flame and ice. Miles away, Harris stumbled out of the vent shaft with the case in hand. Behind him, Rex limped from the smoke, fur singed, eyes glowing in the faint dawn light. He turned toward the mountain and let out one final howl, a sound that carried across the frozen plains, fierce and mournful, a tribute to the man who gave everything for the truth.